Well, thank you very much, and great to be here with you all today. Just before I jump into the presentation, I wanted to share a little story about my relationship to Africa and actually why I am standing here today, I believe. In 1994, I went with VSO, Voluntary Service Overseas, to Ghana for a year, and I spent a year in Bole, in the northern region of Ghana, teaching English. And of course, as with all these experiences, you always learn a lot more than you can teach the kids. But at that time, Ghana was going through a structural adjustment program. And as part of that program, they were having to cut spending in education. And this school where I was teaching was a boarding school because it was a big catchment area. But most of the families didn't have the money to pay the school fees. And so they would pay in goats or chickens or, other things in kind. And then at some point, they were forced to introduce the school fees because otherwise they wouldn't have been able to afford things given the drop in subsidies. And they were going to do that by refusing the kids entrance to the dining room if they hadn't paid their school fees, which would have been the end of a lot of the education for a lot of them. And the day they enforced that, a number of the kids went to town and they got drunk and they got stoned and they came back and they burned down the school. So there I was in the middle of northern Ghana with a burned down school, but an understanding of the conditions that had led to it. And at that moment, I made a commitment. I made a commitment to dedicate my life to doing what I could to make sure that that wouldn't be the future for most of our children. And that started a life of activism and a life trying to work out, how does change work? How do we actually get these big systems to move? And it's those 25 years of exploration that I want to share with you now. So I'm very grateful to GFF, to all of you, for giving me the opportunity to help to meet that commitment. And just in case any of you are doubting this, here is a photo of a very self-conscious 25-year-old white man having been given the local costume just before he was leaving the school in Ghana. And these are some of the children who I worked with. We set up a drama group, we played music, and they must be in their late 30s now. So I hope they're all safe, well, and thriving. So since that time, my journey has been, what does it take to move from the place we have been, an old system, into a new system? What is the nature of change? And this image, which is quite old now, actually, has stuck with me over the years, and I've kept it in the presentations because it so clearly demonstrates what's going on. We've got an old world order, an old way of doing things that served us well for a while, but has run its course and has become unable to deal with the new conditions that we're in and is cracking and falling apart. At the same time, we have a new way of thinking, a new way of understanding, a new way of doing things that's emerging, but is still very fragile and isn't mature enough yet to take over the helm from the old. And this is the change moment that we are in right now. In these kind of moments where all sorts of different issues seem to be coming together, it requires a level of leadership and a level of collaboration that we haven't known before, because only one of these issues can be on the front of the newspaper. And yet we know, and you know very well, that all of them are taking place at the same time. That's giving us a level of complexity that we've never had to face before. So in the 2012 IBM CEO survey, where they interviewed 1,700 leaders across the world, the one theme that came out was what they called hyper complexity. Now, if they invent a new word, hyper complexity, they're not just saying complex, then what does that tell you? That tells me that they don't have a clue about how to navigate this world. It's hyper complex. They're saying we're not getting the people out of the business schools we need to be able to deal with these challenges. And all of these issues that have been on the back burner for a while over the last 20 years or so, as you can see in this image from the New Scientist, have accelerated in their intensity and are interlocking with each other at the same time. Now, these kind of change moments are not new. We have actually been here before. And this is an image from Professor Laszlo showing these key shifts in our evolutionary story as humanity. And the important point to notice is that in the shift from each phase, it is not a linear change that happens. It is a non-linear leap in our evolution. And a non-linear leap has a number of characteristics. One is that we can't actually see the future from where we are now. We can't predict and control the way forward because the next phase that we move into has emergent properties that are completely new to the way we do things. So what we have to do, and that's what all these squiggly lines are, is experiment, try things out, find new ways to do it, see what works, see what doesn't. But it's a radically different way of running things, of leading, than when you're in stable times. So what kind of challenges are we facing then? And it's important to distinguish between them, because in these kind of change moments, it's really these complex challenges that we're faced with. In stable times, they may be simple. They may start to get a little complicated, but now they're complex, where there's inherent variety, uncertainty, it's a dynamic environment. You're continuously got to be sensing, and there may be surprises that we can't predict down the line. Another word that has been used to describe this kind of phase is VUCA, which you may have come across. And in our country team meetings, we talked about wicked challenges. VUCA means it's volatile. The changes happen much more than before. It needs you to be continually on top of them. Uncertainty, where we don't know what the outcome is going to be of our interventions because the system's so complex and unstable. Complexity, there's many, many different factors involved. It's not a simple recipe. And ambiguity, because the data we get is sometimes hard to interpret, and exactly what is it telling us. And this one I found quite recently, which I thought was a nice one, where they compared the VUCA world to our traditional human thinking, where you've got a non-linear world, but we often think in linear ways. There's all sorts of different aspects going on out there, different ways that life is interacting, as we've seen now with the coronavirus, and we tend to put the human at the center. The whole world is adaptive and organic, but we often think of it like a machine. And the real world is networked with all sorts of randomness, but we like to think of things in categories and hierarchies. So that's why we're in this stressful situation at the moment, because we have thinking that came out of the stable world, as it were. And it's not adequate to dealing with the complexity that we're in right now. So the way this works is that at the bottom of this orange curve, let's say that was the Industrial Revolution, for example, we come up with a certain way of thinking, certain solutions to an old set of problems. And those solutions, they work well for a while. But every solution has within it the seeds of the next set of problems. Every solution has the seeds for the next set of problems. And what is happening now is that those seeds are coming to maturity, and we're starting to harvest the challenges that those original solutions have created. And this is quite normal. And so it's important to recognize that this chaos point, as it's called, is a normal thing in this kind of phase. And the nature of it is, we know that the old ways of doing things don't work. But we can also see that the new ways, that emerging blue line, isn't yet mature enough to be able to take over the helm. So what do? That makes for a very challenging leadership context, in which you've got to keep the lights on, you've got to keep things running, but you know that the old ways are past their sell-by date, and yet the new ones aren't mature enough yet. An extremely challenging context to be in. And in those contexts, there's a number of roles you can think of playing. So on the one hand, as the old system runs out of steam, we have to learn to hospice the old. We have to learn to help it to let go in such a way that it fertilizes the soil for the new. And you have to do that by recognizing the contribution that the old system has made. If one just comes in with criticism of the old ways, then the people, the organizations who were involved in building that old way won't feel seen and recognized, and will sabotage any attempt that you make to bring in the new. And remember, it's because of the old path that we've got where we are now. So it's important to recognize the old as we help it to let go gracefully. Parallel with that, we need to be putting in place the conditions for the new to emerge. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And as things come to maturity, we need to tell the story of the choice between this is how we have done things, this is how the new that is emerging, and enable people to walk across that bridge when they're ready. So how do we think about the way we organize ourselves in these kind of contexts, in what must be a dynamic balance between chaos and order? If you have too much order, if we try to over control it, then we're not able to respond quickly to the unfolding events around us. And yet, if we let go too much, we get apathy and people don't know the direction that they're meant to be going. So we're after a context where the resilience is found at the sweet spot in the center, with a combination of taking responsibility on the one hand and letting go of things that don't work on the other. And we call that the chaotic, the combination of chaos and order. Now, how we lead in that space, how we organize ourselves in that space is the challenge, so that we don't flip too much to over controlling, but we also don't go too much to letting go. And that's the art of transformative leadership. This is a classic image for what happens when you have a predict and control culture. So where you try to predict what the future is going to be and control your way forward, and yet the turbulence of the world grows and you get what is called a resilience gap. So a gap between the changes that are happening in the world and your attempt, the plan that you thought you were going to execute, because the world has changed faster. And then we try to stick to our plan and force the reality to our plan, and that just doesn't work. So the question is how we create a more agile approach to be able to respond to the rapidly changing context. So in the stable environment, a predict and control context can work. And yet in this kind of change moment of non-linear change, a whole system change requires what I would call dynamic steering. And dynamic steering is about experimenting and adapting. I live in the Netherlands, and there's lots of bikes here in the Netherlands, probably because it's so flat. And the way you ride a bike is very like dynamic steering. You know where you're going, but you don't just head off in a straight line to get there. Every moment you're having to navigate around the trams, the prams, the cars, the other bikes, the roller skaters. So you know you have your direction in mind, but you're adapting in the moment to the conditions that are coming at you. And that's the kind of governance approach that we need in these contexts. Staying present to what's real now, getting the data, being able to adapt. And we'll hear a lot more about that in one of the later webinars about how to use data in this way, keeping our intention in mind, but continuously steering based on the information that we're getting as it comes in. And that's quite a different approach to a hierarchical model of governance where everything has to go all the way up and all the way down. and you're trying to execute a predetermined plan. So in terms of the kind of culture we need to create in these environments, here's a few principles. And by the way, all of these slides will be available as a PDF for you afterwards, so you can go back and review them. But here's a principle. What was right yesterday might not be seen as right tomorrow. So we can't use as an argument, oh, but it's always worked up until now, because things are changing so fast. We need to put our attention on the future as being more significant than the past for shaping the present. And this is where scenarios work, for example, can be extremely useful, sketching out possibilities of what might happen in the future, preparing us for possible eventualities. Now, in these change moments, what happens, remember that blue emerging line, is that the innovators start to look for new solutions to meet the new life conditions. And what we need to do is we need to search those out, find the new intelligences that appear within these crucibles of innovation as people grapple with the change. Some people will try to stick to the old ways and it'll try to bring it back to business as usual. But you'll also have a group who are trying to do things in a new way and discover new solutions. And those are the ones we need to identify. At the same time, we need to find the overarching goal or vision that can connect up all the stakeholders and transcend other priorities and agendas. So that's a key part of leadership, obviously, being able to not only identify that goal that's going to resonate with everybody, but really communicate it in such a way that people feel they're willing to in a way, make their own agenda subservient to this higher goal. And during these kind of change moments, conflict is normal because the old is breaking down, the new is trying to emerge through. And it's a fine balance between making sure we allow the space for creative conflict in the terms of tensions that emerge that can be used to inform us about the next step. And on the other hand, destructive conflicts that actually prevent the collaboration and creativity moving forward. So containing those while respecting the natural tensions that come in these cycles of change is another principle. Now, as we grapple with these kind of contexts, what we need to do is learn to take into account as much of reality as possible, as much of the information that's out there. And this is a framework from Ken Wilber, an integral theorist. And I use it a lot in organizations and systems to just check, have we covered all the bases? And is our intervention addressing all the different elements? So he's got these 4 quadrants where you've got on the right, what he calls the exterior, left the interior, then you've got the individual and the collective. The exterior is everything that we can see and that we're used to analyzing from our scientific, rational mindset. So it's people's behavior, things you can see, right? But what you can't see is people's motivation. So you can see, measure, inverted commas, objectively behavior. But to get to find out why somebody is behaving in such a way, their attitude, their motivation, you have to get to the interiors, and that requires conversation and different forms of research to find out that information. But you won't change the behavior if you don't change the motivation. So what we're looking for there is what one might call personal alignment between the motivation and the behavior. Now, on the collective level, in the exteriors, this is all your systems, your structures, your policies, all of that kind of stuff that we can see and analyze. However, you've got another side to the collective, which is the invisible side, which is the culture, the shared values that people have, in a way, the collective motivation for the way that they are behaving. And if you try to change the systems and structures without changing the culture, you'll just end up getting a parallel organization where people still do things the way they think they should because of the culture, and they just kind of do what they need to do to please the new systems. So you have to be engaging the culture as well as the systems and structures. You can think of that as structural alignment. At the same time, You're looking for, okay, how does the individual fit into the collective, which one called values alignment? And how does the individual's behavior match with the systems and structures, which we could call mission alignment? So the key is all four of these quadrants need to be taken into account when we're analyzing a situation and when we're creating interventions, not just in a way the easy stuff, which is the things we can measure and look at, behavior and systems and structures, but also why do people behave that way? What is it underneath the surface that will tell us about their motivation for behaving in that way? And here's just an example of how we have used the quadrants to try to create an integral approach in this program. So for example, the Hogan Leadership Assessment, the coaching, the Leading Change webinar all really focus on the individual's role, their motivation, their behavior. Skills workshops are focused on individual behavior, the different things that you can do. At the collective level, the systems thinking webinars, the integrated governance will focus on both the interior and the exterior of the collectives. So how do we organize ourselves? The data, evidence-based and results-driven data is very much on the systems and structures. And for those of you who've experienced the FemLead cohort, I'm sure you'll agree that there's a very strong sense of culture there. It's about relationships between the people. So it's a useful check framework from, are we covering all bases? And of course, there are different skill sets and approaches for engaging the different quadrants, which we'll be covering in some of the webinars and other workshops. So what I'd like to finish with is bringing it back to us as individuals. So what does this kind of change context require from us as people? And I've identified 12 key competencies for transformative leadership that I'm going to speak to now. The first is adaptivity. So in these contexts, we need to be able to take feedback, we need to be able to process it, and we need to be able to respond. That doesn't mean that we give up all of our own ideas. So we also need to be able to hold our own integrity in that. And again, that's a fine balance. But we have to make sure that we're not taking things personally when somebody gives us feedback, but we're seeing it as information from the system. Feedback is critical information from the system that we need to take in, deal with, and respond to. Holding our center in the chaos. So you could think of it also as like a tornado at the eye of the storm. How do we learn to hold our center as all of this chaos unfolds around us and let go of the things that we may be attached to that are no longer serving, and create the conditions for the new ways to start to emerge? And there are obviously different practices one can use from that. A good mindfulness practice, for example, really helps you keep your center. It's like our martial arts. It's like in the martial arts, you're trained to keep your center line, but then be flexible with everything else. So as an attack comes at you, you can let the energy flow past and you don't get knocked off your center point. Letting go is often a big one, because the thing that we are, that has served us in the past, we may be quite attached to. So being able to see and honor what has been part of the past for the contribution it has made, and then let it go, given that it may no longer serve, is a key part of these, of being in this kind of change moment. Not knowing. Now, I remember standing in front of the head of human resources at IBM over here in Benelux, and they tried everything to change the organization. And I said, well, I've got this process that we can go through, and I can tell you what the process is, but I'm afraid I can't tell you what the outcome will be. And he paused and he said, you know what I'm paid to do? He said, I'm paid to know. But because we've tried everything else, we'll give this a go. And this is one of the hardest things, to accept that we may not have all the solutions. We may not know what the future holds. And this lovely Krishnamurti quote, one's not afraid of the unknown, but of losing the known. The known is memory, and to that memory, the mind clings. And there's a really important point here about the distinction between leading from the past, and leading from the future. Our rational cognitive mind, by definition, is about the past. It takes experiences, analyzes them, tries to draw conclusions, and move forward. That's the left brain. It can't do the sensing work that is needed to be able to start to pick up patterns and things from the future. That is a right brain function. Right brain sees the whole and connects things up. The left brain takes it apart into parts and analyzes it. So that means that in these change contexts, we have to learn to develop our intuitive intelligence, our sensing, our ways of feeling that we're often not trained to in our business schools or in our governance schools. It's all about the analysis and the rational mind. And that's why often we're so ill-equipped for these change moments, because when you're leading from the future, you have to be able to activate the right brain intelligences to be able to sense the patterns of what's going on. In the chaos, chaos actually means subtle order. In the chaos, there are patterns. And what we're looking for, see what the left brain will do is it'll see a complex problem, it'll break it down into pieces, and it'll try to find the simplicity this side of complexity. But what we need is the simplicity the other side of complexity. And that can only be seen through the right brain intuitive intelligence. So it's a discipline to not settle for the simplicity this side of complexity, but to hold the tension open, sense the patterns, and see if we can find the simplicity that does lie on the other side of complexity. The complexity requires diversity. So it's a systems law that the amount of complexity in a challenge determines the amount of diversity that you need to be able to solve the problem. So that means, given the complexity of the challenges we're facing right now, we need to be seeking out adequate amounts of diversity to be able to match the problem. Now, that, of course, is harder work than just being familiar with what we know. But we actually have to proactively look for those different perspectives that might give us a sense of how we can move forward. And as that future comes in, and this is like those crucibles of innovation, we need to see, where is the future starting to emerge around us in this human ecology? Where is the future starting to emerge? Identify them and give it attention. So as solutions, as we find solutions, which maybe some person in a backwater somewhere has just kind of come up with, how do we make sure that they get attention, that we resource them if necessary, because they might be holding the key to the future. It requires boldness because we're having to experiment, right? There's no guarantees here. You can't predict exactly what the future is going to look like. So it means we have to have the courage to step out and try new things and trust that we will find other people who are thinking the same way when we do that. Often people are too afraid collectively to say what they really mean. But once you actually voice it, other people will start to say, oh, I was actually thinking that as well, but I didn't dare to say it. So how we take that boldness and really take that step forward. This is Dr. Dolittle. In these moments, the key is to find the people who are ready to take that next step, who are ready to be the innovators and early adopters, and not worry about the people who aren't yet willing to adopt the new. Focus on the people who are willing. So make it an invitation. That will create the patterns and the new stories for the future. Gradually, the late adopters and the laggards might come into, but don't waste energy trying to convince people who are simply not going to go there yet. Find the ones who have the energy and put resources into them. So part of this is, as we experiment, of course, we need to be allowed to fail safely, but we need to fail fast, which means fail and learn, short iteration cycles, where we hold things lightly. We try something out. What's the minimum we can try to get the feedback we need to know how to take the next step? And that requires a sense of lightness, a sense of playfulness, a sense of experimentation, with the rigor and discipline of learning behind it. Now, in these times where things are falling apart and new things are starting to emerge, anyone who's really seriously engaging with it needs to look after themselves. So I'll often say a burnt out change agent is no good to anyone. Looking after yourself in these contexts is not a luxury. It's critical for us to be effective, which is all the basic things we should know if we're in health, like sleep, drink enough, feed ourselves, don't overwork, etc. But how many of us actually do that? And yet it's really important to look after our vitality in these moments. And then the last one kind of combines two things, really. And they're really the archetypal masculine and the archetypal feminine. And the archetypal masculine is the witness that can notice everything and not get disturbed. It's a kind of classic meditation practice. And yet, if you only do that, it becomes cool and detached. So at the same time, we have to have the heart open and be able to feel what is going on, be able to feel what other people are feeling. But if you only do that, you get lost in it and you lose the clarity. So it really is about this combination of the masculine and the feminine, of the being able to take distance from things whilst not losing our attention and our feeling senses as well. So when we pull these into the 4 quadrants, one could say, you know, for us and our interiors as leaders, we need to focus on how do we keep our center and how do we remain agile in these contexts. We need to look after our vitality, make sure we stay fit and well. And collectively, we need to create the conditions for people to be able to work effectively together to co-create with that diversity, seek out the collective intelligence. And we need to build systems and structures that work like an ecology, that respond to inputs rapidly, that self-organize in response to new information and data coming in, and what I would call natural design. And all of these, of course, interlock together. Now, these 12 competencies are listed at the back of the personal leadership enhancement plan, so you can find them there. And of course, the PDF here will be available. Now, I believe if you as leaders are able to solve or at least create the conditions to be able to solve the country health system challenge that you have, you will be seen as great leaders for the country. At the same time, if you're able to create new ways of doing things that can be applied to any of these challenges, then you'll be seen as leaders for the world, and leadership that is desperately needed across the world right now in the conditions that we're in. So I would like to finish with a little rap poem that my brother wrote, and it's called Are You Ready? Are you ready to let go of this 20,000-year eddy, which we know is just an undertow? We be tuning into the real flow here now. You can't compute the impact of this CLP Institute. It's like taking off the mute on the voice of life, stepping onto the edge of the knife, a slice of how humans might be. Can you see what we've done? Can you see what we have begun? This, the form which holds the storm. We feel the creature of learning burning. Invite the world in. It ain't no sin. She's turning at 40,000 miles an hour. That's a fact. That's power. The Big Bang rang, sang, echoing onto the mount, a blast from the past at last. Too much to count the years of evolution, the earth, the human suffering and compassion. We're booming. That's a fusion of chaos and confusion away from the illusion of wealth. Our revolution is coming with stealth. Can you see what we've done? Can you see what we have begun? Do we dare to share the future of how humans might be? Do we dare to be free, and I dare to be me? To be fully human, love confusion, drop the illusion? Now we're booming. Do we dare to step into the places we most fear? Become clear, find a community, true to me? I'm not being cute, there's no parachute. We already jumped out the plane. Do we dare to become sane again? Sane's about brain. It's about living the future now. Yes is the answer to how. Now, we're moving and we're grooving, but stop. Listen to me. Can you see what we've done? Can you see what we have begun? My sisters and brothers from other mothers, we are the ones where the ocean meets the shore. We're the ones we've been waiting for. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thanks indeed. And I guess if this was a face-to-face plenary room, this should be the moment for applause, right? Everybody. So please use your gadgets in the Zoom technology to applaud Peter. Peter, thank you very much for this inspirational address. And I'd almost bet, I'll dare you to find in our usual competency frameworks, leadership competency frameworks, in our usual organizational jargon, this type of approach and language, it sounds new to many of us, unfamiliar to many of us, and yet it was a deliberate option to invite Peter to bring us some of these perspectives. Again, reinstating that this is not a management training course only. It is also about that, but it's really working with you as one of the highest level leaders in your countries and reinforce your capacity to really transform the systems in which you are operating and leave your legacy. Some of the things that Peter shared with us are based on years of research and experience on what was those characteristics that informed enormous leadership transformations around the world from some of the greatest leaders we have met in our lives. So thank you very much for that, Peter, and for the inspiration. The program is naturally built to now gently dissect some of these pieces, make sense of it in your own context, and as we go module by module, add different perspectives of it. But I would like to not just challenge Peter to bring us this rap poem again at the end of the program with the music. So now you are committed to it, Peter, with the music, but for us to get it in our minds as an inspiration moving forward. We go step by step. With this, I'd like to pass the floor to Yomi. We have asked Yomi to reflect with Peter on some of these notions and terms and approaches from her own reflections on the practice. What does this mean in practice? Where do we find examples or inspirations from the daily work of leadership that can reflect some of these extraordinary competences of great leaders around? Yomi, can I pass it back to you, please?
Thank you so much, Luis, and thank you, Peter, for everything that you've brought to your presentation, and including the rap, which I am going to disappoint all of our colleagues, our honorable colleagues, and distinguished and honorable colleagues, that I don't have a rap for you. But what I do have, very much so, is a lot of hope, because so many of the competencies that you were referring to and speaking about, Peter, we've already started to see them in our leaders. We've already started to hear them through their voices, through their actions, and the stories that they're sharing with us. Dr. Mekdes Daba, when we spoke to her, was speaking about what can we plan for. And, Peter, I heard this element of uncertainty that you spoke to in transformative leadership. We need to be willing to meet this uncertainty so that we know that the pandemic has given many of the leaders that we are with here today the ample opportunity for them to rise to the challenge of this unpredictability. And through that, we have seen Dr. Mekdes and many other of our colleagues really embody adaptability and agility. And also, as you were sharing all of these competencies, Peter, I was thinking about also Pauline Arunga. And when you spoke about people's underlying motivations, that has been one of the leading questions in her leadership, which is what motivates some people to make certain decisions. It's something that we inquire and work with on a daily basis. Not only is Pauline curious, but she also brings authentic representation to her advocacy. And she's truly people-centered, and really is not just thinking about the now. Everything that you have discussed and what Luis also shared is an opportunity. It's not just an opportunity to live legacy, but to leave legacy. So what is the legacy that we will not only live as leaders, but we will leave for those that will come on? First and foremost, I really would like to lift Dr. Gurma in the chat. Really had an aha moment around creative versus destructive conflict. And I'm wondering if you could unpack that for us a little bit. How do we recognize when conflict is creative versus when it's destructive?
Yeah, great question. So conflict essentially arises out of tension. And if you can hold the tension without collapsing it too easily, too quickly, then often in the space of that tension, something emerges, an insight emerges. This is the power of dialogue, for example. Take David Bohm's work on dialogue, is going deeper into what is the real challenge here? What's the real essence of this tension? That's dealing with constructive conflict, creative conflict. The moment that these two poles start to fight each other, or you try to get rid of one of them to simplify the problem, as it were, then you've lost the learning opportunity. You've lost the creative moment. You've collapsed the whole tension through probably not being able to hold it yourself enough. And so the destructive conflict would be anything which prevents the emergence of the new insights, the innovations and things that are coming along. So it's really that art of holding the different sides of attention until and that is why bringing in different stakeholders who have different perspectives is creative, because they in a way enhance the tension in a creative way, bringing in the diversity, if you can hold that diversity well. And then out of those kind of inquiries, you often get breakthrough insights that all the individuals would admit none of them individually could have come up with. But it was because of the deep collective inquiry that they were able to get to that kind of insight. And that is the kind of thing we're hoping will happen in the country team meetings.
Thank you so much, Peter. And I can't ignore the follow-up question from Mengistu, and they are asking, how do you think inspirational motivation works in this material world and public sector?
How do you think inspirational motivation in this material world? Yeah, I guess there's a kind of opinion about the material world there behind it. And I mean, I think most people sense that there is something beyond the material that is of kind of greater importance somewhere. So how do you, as a leader, frame a story that lifts people's vision beyond, let's say, the everyday struggles with things, that where they have a feeling from, if I can be part of this, right? If I can achieve that, this will be a legacy, that I'll be able to leave. So from a leader's perspective, it's kind of the question of what will they build a statue to you for, right? And so it's lifting the vision, giving them something that, and it's not rational. So a rational argument won't do it. And it's got to be, connected to the heart, essentially, really, connected to people's needs, their ambitions, their feelings around, what's important in our lives as humans, connected to those things, I think.
And, Peter, to use the words that you used earlier, which is that we're oftentimes, at least in this context, dealing with wicked problems. How do you stay connected to your heart? How do you stay connected to the core?
That's a great question. So we have to find our own practices, and we have to at least carve out space for ourselves to be able to pay attention to ourselves, which is hard when you've got all sorts of stuff and your email inbox is full. But make it part of your day, like even if it's half an hour, beginning of the day, block your diary for whatever it is you do. Is it meditation? Is it some form of movement, you know, where you might do Tai Chi or some other practice, but some practice that helps you still your rational mind? Because it's when we learn to quieten the analytical mind that we get access to other forms of knowing. It could be a walk in nature, you know, but something that allows it to all settle down and that puts the daily problems in a bigger context, you know, that allows us to stay grounded, centered, take them one at a time, deal with them, but not get knocked off our own center. Yeah, I mean, but it's really a discipline and it's not a luxury, I promise you, as a leader, to be effective today. It's not a luxury to take space for yourself. It's actually key, if you are going to be effective, to carve out that space.
Peter, again, to use the word that you used before, which is integrity. In order for me to stand in integrity, I have to also be willing to challenge some of these theories and these models, because we can say that it's not a luxury for leaders to take time. But we know that many of the leaders that we have been spending time with and interviewing are not only mothers, but they are wives and they are carers, and they have so much on their plate. They do, you know, jobs of 3 or 4 people. So how do we then, and they do have a centered practice, because people have told us that they go to their places of worship or they read scriptures. So there are those practices. How do we then take the time that will actually make a difference?
Well,
how do we take the time to make a difference?
It's a decision that you make, basically. It's just a decision. It's as simple as that. You decide, I'm going to do that. And from my experience, when you do take that time, you become a lot more efficient in all the other things that you have to do. So in fact, you end up saving yourself time, because when you're grounded and clear and centered in yourself, you can see what the priorities are, what needs addressing. You can see through the problems much more easily and respond more effectively. And so actually taking that half hour to go for a walk, go for a run, meditate, whatever it is that you do, go to your place of worship, will actually accelerate your productivity in the other domains.
So I'm hearing a little bit of the one of the competencies that you mentioned was letting go. So letting go of the old notions of like, this is going to cost me time, but taking time before you have to effectively steal the time.
Right, you know, and our rational mind will create fear stories for us. Oh, maybe I won't get this done. Oh, if I don't get that done in time, then this and this and this will happen. You know, and often that assumption isn't true. So it's worth checking. Is that really true, that it's going to be the end of the world if you don't answer that email, you know, right now? So it's also about when you center yourself, you know, you're that fear voice, that voice of fear in your mind, you know, you can deal with it more easily. Oh, hello, voice of fear. There you are again. Thanks, but not right now.
Yeah. I'd like to acknowledge these 2 questions, one that has come from Dr. Gama and then one that has come from Melkamu, and that we'll get to afterwards, but Dr. Gama raised her hand.
Thank you, Yomi, and thank you, Peter. Yeah. That was really inspiring presentation and really very informative. So my question is, with regard to these 12 competencies, from theoretical perspective, that really works. But my point is, what is the universality of these competencies? Because we operate in a different political situation, in a different culture, and so many issues. So where leaders are mainly possibility focused, like a transformative leadership, there could be many draining issues where you could be actually not being able to materialize your vision, while that could really work in a circumstance where the environment is always ready to thrive on that line. So is it really universal is my question. If not, what precautions should a leader take in order to really be able to arrive at the destination that is desired? Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Yes, and no, it's not universal. As I hope I was clear on, it's relevant to a certain change context and to certain kinds of challenges. So these highly complex challenges, the VUCA, the volatile world environments, that's where it's appropriate. The last thing you want your finance department to do is start with transformative leadership. Right? You don't want them getting creative with the numbers. You want them just to get it all sorted, make sure it's clear, make sure it's transparent. So it's definitely contextual in the sense that there may be places, and the same, let's say, with your with the fire department. It's the last thing they want. The bell goes, boom, sort it out, cha-cha-cha-cha, off they go and put out the fire. So it is contextual. What I'm suggesting is that the way we have been trained and educated up until now, it prepares us for a stable environment, which we can predict and control. We haven't been trained or educated for these kind of contexts. So it's on top of, it's in a way a set of competencies, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, not to throw the old ways out, but to notice when are they appropriate.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Yomi. You're going to read the other question, I guess.
So Malkamu has asked, how is it possible? Well, maybe they can actually unmute themselves and ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
How about that? You can contribute your voice to the space. Malkamu?
Hello.
Fantastic, thank you.
The presentation was so nice and impressive. I have one question. So in developing countries, everything is limited, be it the resource, the skilled manpower, as it has been stated, the political situation, and everything is limited. The technology is not here. So that how is it possible to make it practical here in developing countries? And maybe there are also situations that need other types of leadership styles. Maybe is that not possible to test them as well? So my main question is, how is that going to be practical in the situations where everything is limited?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I mean, this kind of perspective or this approach isn't really related to resources or technology. It's as much as anything, it's a mindset. And it's particularly important mindset for leaders and people in leadership contexts who are curating the communities or the organizations that they lead. So in fact, this approach can be far more effective when there's less resources because of the agile approach. So remember what I said is that you're trying to take the smallest step that you can to get the feedback you need to work out the next step. So when you take that approach, there's a low risk and low investment in terms of resources needed to take that smallest step. So you don't need a massive budget to be able to take that small step. So in those kind of contexts, it gives you the opportunity with small resources to be able to try something out and get the feedback and then gradually move it forward a step at a time. What requires resources is a 5-year plan, right, with everything associated to it. So in a way, this works more effectively in those kind of contexts. Mm-hmm. And as I said before, just to clarify on leadership styles, yes, indeed, there may be other leadership styles for other kind of contexts that would be relevant.
Wonderful. Yomi, I don't know if you have any burning other question or comment to Peter, otherwise we'd probably get people into smaller groups to discuss some of this and then be back to plenary. Yomi?
Yes, that sounds great. I just wanted to double click on a point that Peter made. the distinction between the material resources and our resources as leaders. And to your point, Malcolm, you spoke about limited, and I think that everything that I hear Peter sharing with us is the possibility of what is limitless. So our inner resources, being able to tap into those, and for many of us, they already tap into those, and then start to utilize those to create even greater possibility.